anything like that. I was just going to give a little background on how I came to write my book, and then Anne was going to talk a little bit about hers, and then we were just going to kind of open it up to you guys for questions and maybe discussion between the two of us. So as our volunteer mentioned, my background is I'm actually a physician at Ochsner in New Orleans, overseeing the training and practices of 60 interns and residents in the internal medicine department there. So it's a pretty stressful job, and my sort of hobby and my release is to write. I like to write and I like to research history and that sort of thing. I come from an old plantation family. My grandmother was a Molizan who grew up on a plantation in Franklin, Louisiana, and then I actually grew up across the drive from her on what was Seven Oaks plantation property. We didn't live in the old house at the time. In fact, the house had been destroyed in '77. I was born in '79. And realized at an early age that there was a house that had been on that property. I'd seen pictures of it, but never really understood why anybody in their right mind would tear down such a beautiful place. And actually kind of grew up and still had that on my mind, still couldn't understand why anybody would tear down such a beautiful place, and started researching that a little bit. And that really was the beginning of my first book, which was Lost Plantations, The Rise and Fall of Seven Oaks. There was a huge political battle in the 70s that took place between John Lario and Edwin Edwards and all these people. It was really interesting, and fortunately I found some great publishers in the University Press of Mississippi. I had my marketing director, Steve Yates, here, and was very happy for them to pick up the first book. But while researching the book, I came across so many people who said, well, are you looking into Uncle Sam? Are you looking into Belle Grove? Are you looking into Petit Versailles? And all these other wonderful Louisiana plantations that have been destroyed over the year by fires and floods and bulldozers, most of all, which is really the saddest of all the destructions. And then, I got even further out, and doing the library research, I found other homes really across the South, Waloosing and Texas, and so many others in all the other states, Rosewood and Rosewell in Virginia. And so this really led to the creation of my second book, Lost Plantations of the South, which is a much more substantial book. And it was a really fun book to write. I started writing it in my third year of med school, finished in my third year of residency, which took me 4 years, spare time. And I had a real fun time writing it. It was also an easy book to write during that time because it was very compartmentalized. I kind of wrote about each plantation at one time. So, I'd have a very, very difficult few weeks at the hospital where I couldn't write, and then I would have a little downtime of a day or two where I could write about a plantation, kind of put that aside, and kind of compartmentalize it in that way, which worked out very well. The hardest part about writing this book really was choosing which plantations to include. The editor-in-chief over at University Press of Mississippi wanted an 80,000-word book, and that's what I signed the contract for. And I think I delivered 120 or 130,000 words. But, they're wonderful people over there, and they allowed me to publish that as is. But I included 60 plantations. I probably reviewed the history of several hundred, if not 1,000 plantations, and heard about several hundred more. And it really was, very difficult. Of course, some of the Louisiana plantations were easy, like Belle Grove. Of course, Belle Grove was the largest plantation home ever built in the South. It was the largest home ever built in the South, period. And it was destroyed in the 1950s in a fire, and then the ruins were bulldozed. But it had a wonderful history in terms of the family who lived there. And it has largely been forgotten. In fact, most of the history that we hear about plantations today is based on the plantations which are still standing, because that's what we see. But if you realize there were 50,000 plantations in the South at one time, we probably have 1,000 or maybe a couple of thousand that are still standing. So, the great majority of this, over 95% of the plantation South, has physically been destroyed. And really, to understand what the plantation South was, and to understand that culture in that time period, we've got to look at those plantations which are no longer standing. And we're losing more and more literally every year. Of course, Seven Oaks is included because that was my family estate, and that was a wonderful old home that was owned by my Zerang ancestors. Of course, they lost it after the Civil War in a battle with the railroad. And after that, it became a resort, believe it or not, and then served as a military barracks during World War I. It was actually bulldozed by a railroad company, as I mentioned, after this big political battle took place. It was bulldozed in 1977.